Welcome back to the Bible in Context.
Here we are again.
Yep, we're going to dive into the rest of the covenant ceremony at the end of Genesis 15.
So last time we left off, we were just talking about the ceremony, and it's kind of it reminds me of Fantasia a little bit. If you've ever watched Fantasia, the Disney movie where there's like floating brooms and it's weird.
No, it's been a while, but yeah.
And this scene just reminds me of what's going on there, and so why don't you kind of describe the scene one more time, and then we can kind of talk through specifically. There's a couple significant issues that we need to wrestle with in this scene.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about in this passage. You know, actually, though, I think we watched Fantasia with our oldest like last year, and the brooms were scary. So
yeah, well, I think this would be kind of a scary scene.
We haven't watched it in a while. So we just got done with Abram. He's been questioning Yahweh, like, I don't have an heir, I don't possess anything yet, are you going to give me these things? And Yahweh says, yeah, let's make a covenant, and so I will put my name on the line to show you you're going to get these things. And I mean, that's significant, because Yahweh putting his name on the line there, that's not just like, okay, your meaningless reputation. His name, that is the way that he is going to redeem the nations. He's showing his honor so the nations will flock to him, and He'll save them. They'll come to him. They'll come back to the garden. So without his name, God is still God, but without his name, he's not redeeming his family.
Right.
So, all right, he's going to show himself as reliable through these covenants. And so Abram, we talked about last time, this kind of fits in with normal suzerain vassal treaties, which is kind of like a higher king and a lesser noble that owes allegiances to that king. It bears some markings to normal covenants in the ancient Near East. So Yahweh comes down to walk through these pieces, to put his life on the line, his name on the line there. And he comes down as, in verse 17, that he comes down as a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch to pass through the pieces.
Now, what does that represent?
So we see Yahweh show up in a pillar of fire at the Exodus. And I think that's what this is a call to. That's what a lot of scholars notice. And I feel like it's a pretty clear one. I mean, fire and smoke is where he shows up. And, we also see the smoke, the cloud of smoke on top of Sinai. You also get the idea, I feel like it might call to the cloud of incense that's always in the tabernacle in the temple. So these elements are just very representative of Yahweh's presence, really throughout the Old Testament, I suppose, not just the Exodus, but I do think it links very closely with the Exodus, especially as he passes through these dead animals. I don't know if this is what the author is directly trying to do, but I think there's a little bit of narrative similarity between this and him passing through the waters, which, you know, if you have been listening for any amount of time, you know how the waters are associated with death. So here we have, again, Yahweh in the form of fire passing through the waters to protect his people, which, as well, in this passage, we do have direct foreshadowings of the Exodus. So I think that all the more just links this fire and smoke of Yahweh to the Exodus of Israel. So before Yahweh passes through these pieces, he tells Abram, know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not their own. They'll be servants there, and they will be afflicted 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve afterwards. They shall come out with great possessions. You shall go down to your fathers in peace and be buried in a good old age. So we have the Exodus here foreshadowed, and at this point, it's foreshadowed in very familiar terms.
Right. Specific.
Yeah, so far we've talked about some of these elements already in the Exodus motif. So we see in this that there will be a king that oppresses Abraham's children. That king is afflicted. Again, the same word there used in the Exodus for afflicted. They come out with a mixed multitude and great possessions. Here we see them having great possessions as they come out. And then they are brought back to the land, just like the elect one that goes through an Exodus is often rested in Yahweh's dwelling, brought back to the dwelling of Yahweh. And then there is the commission to subdue that we often see at the end of an Exodus. And here we have him being told that they are going to come back and take control of this land, to subdue this land and possess it.
Right. So, okay, what's going on in verse 16? This is the highly controversial passage that I just basically skipped over my sermon and said, listen to the podcast, because I didn't have time to like flesh it all out
Just
on
punt and
Sunday
say,
morning.
I have it figured out by then.
That's pretty much what I did. And what I meant by that is I'm going to let Caleb explain it.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, this is all from a book that I actually handed this book to Nate a couple days before his sermon. So
it messed me up.
Yeah, I feel kind of bad about that. So
because I thought I understood this passage until I started reading. There's a whole chapter dedicated to this one verse in this book, and it completely flipped my understanding of what was going on in this passage. So I'll let Caleb try to. It's a pretty nuanced argument.
It really is.
Yeah.
But so this book is The Lost World of the Israelite Conquest by John Walton. If the conquest confuses you, or all the killing that happens in the book of Joshua, I highly recommend this book. It's really great to help understand all those passages, some of the key vocabulary and narrative elements that you wouldn't get by just reading through the story. Or at least, it's such a long story, you may not remember the beginning from the end, and so this helps you put some pieces together that just really do some good work on the conquest. Anyway.
So, we probably should read the verse that we're talking about.
Yeah, let's do that first. That might help.
So verse 16, this is Genesis 15, verse 16. And they shall come back here in the fourth generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. So that's the ESV version. And I'll let you explain a better translation.
Okay, well, real quick, what does this interpret this for us? What does this verse sound like it's saying?
What it sounds like it's saying, if you're just reading the English here, it sounds like that after the fourth generation, they're going to come back into the land of Canaan, but they have to wait to get back there because God is waiting for the Amorites to finish sinning, or for their sin to get so bad that it's time for them to be subdued once again. So that's the sense that I got out of it. That's how I was going to preach it until you gave me that book.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, there are several confusing words in this passage. Now, here's the fun part. Let's try to get this to translate to audio.
Maybe we can start with just saying, okay, the phrase "they came back here" in the fourth generation. Isn't that like Hebrew slang for after you die?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have taken this and said, well, the Exodus happens roughly 400 years after they get there, and this is a couple hundred years before that. So, I mean, we're 500-something years away from the Exodus, and so they'll take that and just say, well, the fourth generation, that means about 400 years. But that doesn't make sense. That doesn't track. Yeah. No. Again, we're farther away from that. Now, can you think of another place in the Bible where the fourth generation is mentioned?
Yeah, Exodus 34:7. Yeah,
it's where all the attributes of Yahweh, he's listing them off to Moses, and he says that I'll visit the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and the fourth generation. Now, that's usually a troubling verse. We'll table that for now.
Right.
But it shouldn't be a troubling verse, but we're going to table that for now. It kind of is like a Hebrew slang for continuing on into the future. It doesn't mean like right at the fourth generation this cuts off, but usually a person will see their third and fourth generation. You'll see your grandkids and your great-grandkids maybe. So the fourth generation basically is the end of your lifespan.
Right. So after the fourth generation he's basically saying that, okay, after you've passed on, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's all that means. When it says they shall come back here in the fourth generation, it just means sometime long after you're dead. Now, why would he bring Israel back to conquer the land long after Abram's dead? Is it because the Amorites have to sin enough to be destroyed, or is something else going on here? Well, the next word that we should talk about is the word iniquity. And the word here in Hebrew is avon. This word is often translated as iniquity or sin, something like that, something that you commit. But what this word actually means, and if you look at its occurrences, it means something along the lines of punishment or calamity, not sin or iniquity. You can even think back to where this word appears in the story of Cain, where he says that my avon is more than I can bear. Right. It's not his sin that he's bearing, it's his punishment that he's bearing, the calamity that has come upon him that he is bearing. And you even see that I think Lot, when he is leaving Sodom, he is fleeing the avon. not the sin. He's fleeing the calamity that came upon them because of their sin. So that's why these words get often confused, because usually avon, punishment or calamity, come upon someone because of their sin, but it doesn't mean sin or iniquity. It means the punishment. And there can even be calamity for things that don't come from sin. Just something bad happens to someone. They've had avon visited upon them. On the whole, this word does, if you look up all of its occurrences, it does make a lot more sense as punishment or calamity rather than sin or iniquity, which is committed. So does that make sense now? For the calamity of the Amorites is not yet complete. That doesn't entirely make sense yet. So what about that word complete? That actually needs to be reevaluated as well. It's the word shalem, which is the same root for shalom, peace be with you. May you be whole or complete. That's what it's saying. So something here has not filled up, not complete, or even given out in its full measure. There's a corresponding way that this is used in Ruth. I think it's chapter 2, verse 12, where the wages that were owed to someone were not shalem. They were not complete, meaning they had not yet been given out in full measure. So far we have that Abram's children will come back long after he is dead because the calamity of the Amorites has not yet been paid out. And that's the last word we need to look at, is that word not yet. In Hebrew it's ad hina, and it often has the connotations of not just the word yet, but it's something that has not yet happened, but also will not continue into the future. It talks about sometimes priests or guards, they've stood and guarded Jerusalem ad hina up to this point, and they're expected to continue to do that in the future. And so here is a more wooden translation of this verse of Genesis 15, verse 16. And in the fourth generation they shall return here, for the calamity of the Amorites is not yet and will continue to not be complete. Now, here's what that means. That was a little confusing. It's a bit of a wooden translation. It means basically, Abram, after you are dead, your children shall return here, since the destruction of the Amorites will continue to be put off and deferred. Now, this actually flows with the narrative pretty well. Why would it be important that the Amorites are not destroyed until after Abram's dead?
Yeah, because the Amorites were in covenant relationship with Abram and helped him in the war that he just won.
Yeah, they're Abram's friends.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, the previous narrative, chapter 14, we just saw not only how they're friends, but like you just said, they were his military allies. So Abram probably didn't want these guys destroyed. And they're going to be eventually, when they come back to the land, they fall into the group of the Canaanites, which are cursed by Noah, and do all these terrible practices that we'll read about in Deuteronomy. But at this point, Yahweh is putting off that destruction for the sake of Abram and his friends. So just to reiterate this narrative tension a little bit, in chapter 10 we saw how Ham gave birth to Canaan, Canaan gave birth to all these nations that are in Canaan, and the Amorites are part of that. So we should feel a little tension whenever we see, Abram and Amorites are friends, they're covenanting together. That's weird. Cool, but what's the deal? Because they have been cursed by Noah in Genesis 9. And we're going to see in Deuteronomy and places like that they are in this sinful lump of the Canaanites that are doing all these abhorrent practices and would destroy the Yahwistic identity of Israel if they continued, if their cultural identity was not wiped out. So they will be subdued under Israel when they return to the land. But again, for the sake of Abram, because he has made friends with these guys, he's covenanted with them, they've come to him because they see Yahweh's blessings on him, that is going to be put off until Abram is long gone. So I think that verse gets, quite a hefty retranslation. I think it's very helpful, at least in the story.
Yeah, and I think this retranslation does very much fit better with the rest of the narrative.
After this verse in chapter 16, we come back to, this is where the smoking firepot and the flaming torch pass through the pieces, and Yahweh covenants with Abram that he will possess this land, his offspring will possess this land. And there's this little note in verse 17 about when the smoking firepot and flaming torch are passing through the pieces, that the sun had gone down. Which, that's pretty interesting, because earlier we're told to look at the stars.
Right.
So the stars are already out.
Yeah.
So the sun is just now going down?
I had never noticed that before.
Yeah. So in Victor Hamilton's Nikot commentary on Genesis, he points out this little chronological, quote unquote mistake here. And I think this is showing that this is not to be read as possibly as a literal timing note about like, hey, this is the time of day it was, but this has a lot more meaning. I mean, either way, this is an odd statement to put in here. This is all surrounded by an Exodus prediction and Exodus imagery with Yahweh coming as smoke and flame. And so, at what time of day do the Israelites pass through the waters?
During the night, wasn't it?
It was. And then what happens as soon as they reach the other side?
Does it turn day?
It does. The sun rises. And that happens again and again in Genesis.
Huh.
The sun rises whenever creation is done. There's light. And then you also have, Jacob, the sun rises after he is rescued by Yahweh during his wrestlings, which we'll get to that. And I'm pretty sure the sun rises as Sodom is being destroyed and Lot comes out of the city. So sunrise is linked to the completion of an Exodus.
Interesting.
The sun will rise with healing in its wings. Malachi.
Yeah.
It becomes a staple of Old Testament imagery.
Oh, that's good.
So yeah, he's passing through. He's mimicking passing through the waters, and the sun has gone down. It's dark, and so it's just another callback to the Exodus. And I just thought that was worth bringing up there because I thought that was really cool. It's a little statement that some have seen and said like, well, this text was just spliced together and doesn't make any sense, but it's a little thematic marker, just something else adding to the Exodus connotations of this passage.
Right.
Well, good deal. I think we have hit a lot of small points in chapter 15 that have helped tie it together. I wish the past couple episodes didn't sound like a commentary where we're just hitting little issues, but we were able to treat the story a little larger, but I hope that's helpful and helps us read it a little better. And I think next time we're going to do a bit of a recap so that we can put our eyes on the story so far, and then we'll continue on digging into Hagar's story.
That sounds like a plan.
Awesome.
See you next time.